Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to Crowe Soberman for inviting me. I'm really excited that I could be part of this event, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm in a field where I don't work 9 to 5. I actually, if you watched the news at 11 last night, you'll know I was still working till midnight. So I'm a little foggy this morning. Hopefully I'll be coherent, so please bear with me. I'm really excited to share a little bit of my journey. It was really inspiring to hear from Larissa. And I want to share a bit of my journey to becoming the first hijab-wearing reporter in Canada, because you don't get here by not taking risks. And I'm not the only person who had to take risks. Those who hired me did as well. And it's crazy to think that in a country as multicultural and diverse as Canada, that putting someone who looks like me on TV is considered a risk, because it hasn't been done before, but it is. And so I want to begin by talking a little bit about representation, and I specifically use that word representation and not diversity, because it's important that people of color and people from marginalized groups have a seat at the table, and that seat be a meaningful one, not just on TV, but also in our workplaces, in our schools, in our governments. Our presence should be about more than just filling a quota or presenting the united face of Benetton on a billboard ad. It's about creating a space to truly understand a different perspective, a different way of life, an experience, or in my case, a story, because that's what I do every day. I tell stories. Growing up, I never saw anyone who looked like me on TV. And that can be really damaging, because it tells you what you can or cannot achieve and what spaces you are or aren't entitled to. And it's this way of saying, this isn't for you. This, people like you don't really belong here. So don't bother trying. Now, I owe a lot of my success to my mother. When I was in elementary school, my older sister and I, we were the only 2 girls in our school who wore the hijab, and we often felt a little bit alienated and underrepresented. But my mother was determined to make spaces for us and make us feel like we could be proud of our faith and still be an important part of our society. And so she would make sure that our elementary schools would put on celebrations for Eid. She would lobby our local swimming pools to create women-only swim time so we could participate. And in doing these kinds of things in our community, she made me realize that sometimes just because opportunities didn't already exist for us, didn't mean that we couldn't ask for them or we couldn't create them for ourselves. And so I always carried that notion with me as I moved through school and into the professional world. Now, as I entered higher education, again, I was the only visible Muslim woman in hijab in my broadcast journalism class trying to become a TV reporter. And again, I felt underrepresented, but especially because I didn't have teachers or mentors who had had similar experiences as me. So, even up until this moment, the reality of pursuing a career in broadcast journalism really seemed like a little bit of a fantasy, because there were still these questions bouncing around in my head. Is there really room for me in this industry? Will I have to compromise myself and my beliefs in order to achieve my dreams? And will my hijab essentially be the death knell of my career? But I forced myself to push those questions out of my mind and move beyond them, because, again, my mother's voice was ringing in the back of my head. Just because no one else has done it before doesn't mean it can't be done. And studying broadcast journalism at Seneca, I would get a chance to practice reading from a teleprompter and do the weather in front of a green screen and learning to shoot and edit stories. And I was finally getting a taste of this career and what it might look like. And I knew it was something that I was made for. And I wasn't ready to let that dream go. And so I had to find a way to make it happen. So just as my mother had done before me, I would do the same. I would demand to be heard. I would take up space as a woman, as a person of color, as a Muslim in hijab. But I quickly learned that it wasn't going to be easy, because I realized that sometimes some of us have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. And I kind of always knew that in the back of my head, but it was never truer for me than when I entered this field, where even though your competence and your skills and your integrity are important, let's face it, there's also still a pretty big emphasis on how you look. And knowing that I wasn't willing to change the way that I looked. I instead focused on honing my journalism skills so I could never give a hiring manager a reason not to give me a job. So no one could ever say, oh, she's just a token hire, she didn't really deserve to be here. And I soon realized that hard work wasn't the only thing that was going to get me far. I learned that there were some other very important skills that would be the keys to my success. One was being persistent. The other was learning to have some guts. And both of those, I think, involve taking risk. Now, persistence turned out to be one of the things that landed me my first reporting job. Over the course of 2 years, I applied for the same position at CTV Kitchener, which ended up being my first reporting job, 3 different times. The first time I applied, they said, thanks so much for your application. You just don't have enough videography experience. So I went back to Rogers TV where I was volunteering, and I said, I need shooting experience. Can you guys help me out? And they did. So the second time I applied, and they wrote back and they said, oh, thank you again. We decided to hire someone internally. And then I did something pretty crazy. I quit my full-time job. I was working as a chase producer at CTV News Channel at the time. And everybody thought I was nuts. Because here I had a full-time job at a national news station with benefits. It's hard to come by. And I was quitting. But I said to myself, if I was serious about wanting to pursue a career on air, and I feel like I've plateaued at this job, I've learned everything I can here, I'm just kind of spinning my wheels, then it's time for me to really focus on what I want to do and take the steps that I need to get there. So I spent about 8 months freelancing, working contract here and there, and working on my demo at the same time, and volunteering at Rogers TV, and living with my parents. Thanks, Mom and Dad. They did help me be able to achieve that dream. So the third time I applied for that job at CTV Kitchener, maybe they ran out of excuses, or maybe they got tired of telling me no, or maybe they just saw something and they decided to give me a chance. And that was the first time I learned the true meaning of that term, no risk, no reward. So being resourceful and having some guts was something else that was also vital to my success. In many ways, I had to kind of be my own cheerleader, and because a lot of times in this industry, it's not always about what you know, it's about who you know, and frankly, I didn't know anyone. So I didn't have the networks of people in this industry. I didn't have, I have amazing parents, God bless them, but none of them had friends who could get me an internship in broadcast news. And I didn't have mentors who had similar experiences as me, because there weren't any women in hijab working in TV news that I could reach out to. So I had to create my own networks and kind of become my own hype man, and because there was no one really to vouch for me in that way. In so many ways, people in my industry would see hiring me as a risk. Now, eventually in my career, as my career went on, I was able to prove myself, and I was given more opportunities, and last year, after working for nearly a year as a reporter at City News, I became the first woman in hijab to anchor a major Canadian newscast. And this milestone garnered me a lot of attention. And I did a ton of media interviews from outlets across the globe, New York Times, Washington Post, Vogue magazine, and people were saying, wow, and it's about time, this is long overdue. We're so inspired, keep up the amazing work. But along with that positive reaction came some negative reaction. And usually I avoid the comment section online, because that's where intelligence goes to die. But it was hard to ignore my own Twitter feed when people were tweeting right at me. And people would send me really ignorant things, and they would talk about how, we're normalizing this oppressive religion, and Sharia law is coming to Canada. One person wrote, "Get this pro-jihad bag lady off my TV." Another said, "ISIS is hiring, why don't you go to Syria?" My favorite, though, was the guy who posted an article with my picture and wrote his own headline, and it actually made me laugh. It said, "Canada's first hijab-wearing, bacon-hating anchor." And yeah, I gave him points because that one gave me a good laugh, and I thought about adding it to my Twitter bio. The funny thing about the internet is that people have no problem telling you exactly what they think, but they aren't always so honest in person. And one question I repeatedly get asked is, was it hard breaking into TV news as a woman wearing a headscarf? Did you experience racism as you tried to succeed in your career? And I would often have to say, no, I was really lucky. In my early years, I didn't face discouragement from my teachers or from my managers. But that's because it wasn't always obvious or in my face as it was now on Twitter. No one was calling me a pro-jihad bag lady or telling me, that I couldn't be here. But there was this lingering feeling. Sometimes it was just the elephant in the room. It was like this cloud hanging over me of prejudice, of misunderstanding, of ignorance. And I often felt the need to bring it up in interviews and in conversations so that managers could feel comfortable talking about their apprehensions and I could help them overcome them. After anchoring at City News, a former classmate reached out to me after she'd read an interview that I'd done. And she shared something that she had kept to herself for many years. She told me that one of my professors had approached her near the end of the year and had said, "Hey, do you think that you could talk to Ginella about whether she would consider removing her scarf? Because she's really talented, but she's gonna have a hard time in this industry." Now, obviously, that professor knew that it wasn't a good idea to have that conversation with me because it wouldn't bode well for the department, she might be accused of discrimination, and that's why she asked my friend to casually talk to me about it instead. But my classmate was horrified and she refused to relay the message, and she never told me about it until now. So yes, I can say with confidence, no, I've never been told flat out by a hiring manager that they wouldn't hire me because of my hijab. I've never had a professor tell me that if I wanted to succeed in this business, I would have to remove it. Because frankly, those people all knew that doing that would be against the law. And, but just because I didn't hear it myself, didn't mean that those conversations never happened or that people weren't thinking about it. So that's why I continue to do the work that I do, even when it gets hard. Because I go back to that word that I used at the beginning, representation. So many people misjudge, misunderstand Muslim women, especially because they don't know anything more about Islam than what they see on their TV screens. And now, every night, when I read the news and I'm seen on televisions across the city and now across the country because we've expanded nationally, I'm letting people know what Muslim women can do, what we care about. I'm not preaching about my faith, I'm not talking about Islam, I'm just existing in a space in a way that hasn't been seen before. I'm just doing my job, but I happen to be wearing a scarf while I'm doing it. So I hope that in doing that I can have a tiny impact on people's perceptions of what Muslim women can do and can be. And I hope that I'm helping more hiring managers in all different kinds of fields take risks and give us a chance to show you what we can do.